Mary Stuart Masterson is in love with Eric Stoltz. Eric Stoltz is in lust with Lea Thompson. He is a boy from the wrong side of the tracks. His father's great ambition for him is to go to college, get a business degree, be the first one in his family to be white collar. Lea Thompson, similar but different, also comes from the other side of the tracks, but as a very attractive girl, she is breaking through somewhat the high pressure, distinct social strata that is 1980s high school in America by dating a popular boy who has money, who apparently has looks, who has popularity, who is a jerk and a user and a liar and a cheater and a manipulator. This is your classic romantic comedy, and yet it's not. Your classic John Hughes funny romance that leads to poignant teen love story, and yet it's not. This is 1987, Some Kind of Wonderful. The amazing thing about this film is that it is not standard. Now, in the 1980s, I, being a huge nerd and a sci-fi fan, when films like this were popular, I really didn't see them. There were some that I did, some I saw early 90s, finally at college. This one I just watched the other day for the very first time. I've heard of these people, I'd seen bits and pieces culturally referenced, but I had not seen it, and I was kind of blown away by this. Your standard sort of 80s romantic comedy, poignant teen drama by the end, that sort of repetitive story, you think when this film opens that that's what you're going to get. Even though you have the slightly unusual thing that Eric Stoltz is best friends with Mary Stuart Masterson. She's a tomboy in the parlance of the time, kind of masculine. She likes to play the drums. They are best friends, though they are different genders. Not completely standard for the time, but it's there. He, of course, wants this popular girl that is dating this popular boy, and you think you know what's going to happen. Your classic story, boy wants girl that's out above his station. Somehow or another, they will end up together. Lessons will be learned. Bad guys will be punished. Popular kids will be brought down a notch. All those good old-fashioned things that you look forward to, especially 1980s good, solid value system. And then the film doesn't give us that. We get an assortment of unusual characters that, well, subvert our expectations. I want to talk about that for a minute, though, quick. We have cultural expectations. When two guys in a cop movie go into a bar looking for a suspect, we know there's going to be a fight. We know certain things are going to happen in certain places. We have those expectations. There's nothing wrong with having those cliches and those expectations, and there's nothing wrong with a movie meeting our expectations. What we're really looking for in that instance is how well do they do it? Is there anything unique about the way that we get the payoff? Is it just done well? And it can be anything from comedy to drama. We're not generally looking for our expectations to be subverted. We want them to be met and to literally be satisfied. Then again, a really good quality film can subvert our expectations, give us things we don't expect. Now, this can work, but it really only works when you respect what you're doing and you have a serious story to tell and you do it well. By which I mean, if you're doing Kurtzman's Star Trek and suddenly you've decided Robert April will suddenly be an African-American, or is he? It's the future. Captain April will suddenly swap races, or people will swap genders, or people will swap sexual orientations, or will completely retcon their whole origin story of a franchise you've loved for 30 years. That doesn't work. What that is really pissing on the genre, the franchise, the history. You might, in very narrow circumstances, get away with it, like Battlestar Galactica did when Starbuck was a woman, but you do that because you write it very well, you get the right people in it. That's how you subvert an expectation and do it correctly. What I'm looking at is not the way they just randomly throw things in that you don't expect, weird stuff that just shows they don't know how to write and they don't know how to be consistent within their own universe. The random unexpected is not really subverting your expectations. Things that do it and do it well. I did a review previously on Ice Princess, weird Disney movie about ice skating, but they did a fabulous job with the women in that movie. You expect them to be a certain thing and they're not, and you expect them to do a certain thing and they don't, but it comes out so well that it comes out much more human and poignant than you expected from that sort of film. This is what we find in Some Kind of Wonderful. At the beginning of this film, we get all your usual stereotypes and a few that we don't generally see in a lot of these movies. We got the female tomboy, the boy who's best friends with the female tomboy. We meet a skinhead, which also needs to be explained. There's a pack of multiracial skinheads in this, because this is the 80s. We think of skinheads as white supremacists. Skinheads, when it started as a trend, had more to do with heavy metal rock, some punk rock. It was a sort of rebellion. It was sort of a look. It was like goth, pre-goth, if that's a thing. It was some years of vagueness before the sort of right-wing paramilitary extremists, however you want to define them, the white nationalists or whatever, sort of leaned into that community to recruit. But even then, through the 90s, the last I heard of them, there was an alternative push against that within that community called SHARP, Skinheads Against Racial Prejudice. So it's weird today to see an 80s movie where the skinhead can be the good guy, and he will turn out to be, but it's because it was a whole different thing back then. And I say this as a happy bald man that has a haircut like that. Instead of following the normal pattern of subverting the culture of the high school, of getting the girl, of it all working out in some perfect romantic, traditional, typical way, we get a whole lot of strange things happen in Some Kind of Wonderful. And there's a lot of stuff going on. There's the parents and their angst about their son's future. There's Leah Thompson and her angst about where she's been, what she's been doing, and how her life is going. Of course, our idiot antagonist, the guy who's popular and got money and a jerk, he more or less remains that throughout the film. But our skinhead, when we meet him at the beginning, and he's, and this is the 80s, makes a crack about our tomboy, Mary Stuart Masterson. You must be a lesbian, you must be a lesbian. And you think these are the school bullies, but you know that the popular guy is the bad guy to girls. But then a number of these things go completely haywire. The complexity of the human relationships as they develop feel a lot more real. Case in point, when he finally does get his date with the popular girl because she's tired of her popular boyfriend cheating on her and treating her like dirt, a lot of strange tension develops. He cashes out in advance the money he had saved up of years of working after school to go to college, buys a pair of diamond earrings, and prepares to give them to this girl, even after finding out through the grapevine, being convinced that she's just using him to make a joke out of him. What in the world is going on? They finally get to their date. There's all this tension. Then it finally eases. They confront one another about various aspects of their life. He gives her these diamond rings, and this is not her falling into his arms and riding off into the sunset. She will not end up keeping them, though he gives them to her with this very noble sort of intent that she should not have to borrow them from her rich friends. She should have her own. She should not be cheapening herself. She should be raising herself up. And it really drives home her own self-doubt about where she's ended up, the things she's done. These people are, in the film universe, becoming adults, and they're all in tension about what kind of adults they're going to become. And the real turnabout is when she's able to say to him, when confronted about using him to make her boyfriend jealous or whatever, said, "You've been using me. You've been using me because getting a date with me and getting in with me is your way to get back at every rich elitist kid that you ever were jealous of." This is an amazing moment where it does this turn, where both of these people are confronted by their inadequacies. We as the audience are confronted by their shortcomings. None of these people come out clean or noble. He blew this money on diamond earrings. Just essentially, it was his revenge against a structure and a community he was always feeling left out of. It is not noble, his intent. Underpinning his desire for her wasn't that he thought she was a great person or that he thought she was beautiful, but that he thought possessing her would somehow get back at or raise him up to the level of the very people that he hated and were jealous of. I had to rewind and watch this part a couple times because that is so well thought out. This subverts completely your expectations, but it does it in that way that's so real, so human, and really hits to the core. Because it's what everybody at one time, whether you were one of the popular kids or not, thought that you weren't. Everybody that grew up in that era, probably grows up ever, goes through that period. And this really spoke to it. That really hit on the nose what things were really about. And so you have these two deeply flawed people who don't know what they're going to do with their lives going forward for sure. And they do not end up together to figure it out together and live happily ever after. This is not what occurs. Going to the party they were invited to by her ex-boyfriend for the sole intention of beating up Eric Stoltz and making him look bad. There's this moment where he wants to confront the guy. He knows what's going to happen, but Eric Stoltz's character doesn't want to run anymore. He'd rather just confront it and let it work itself out. And as this tension heightens and you're like, what's going on? The girl that loves him is working as the driver for the date. The girl that he lusts for is with him in this party. There's threats of violence about to break out, and everybody's, in order to lift themselves up from the status in which they had put themselves or viewed themselves, they put themselves in this jeopardy, both Eric Stoltz and Lea Thompson's characters, in order to get purged and free of that baggage from before. The only way to go forward is through, and then you get that complete, it's amazing. You're like, well, they're going to get their butts kicked, right? But it's what they want because, and the unexpected turn, you'd seen little bits and pieces throughout. They kind of became friends with the weird skinhead at the beginning who looks a lot like Christopher Maloney, but is not Christopher Maloney. And he shows up with his boys at the party. And then there's this immediate physiological threat because rich Playboy kid with his hooligans that are going to beat up this poor nerd, they know they don't stand a chance against these skinheads in leather jackets with chains, and they get shamed and humiliated as they deserve. It's all very beautiful. And again, when now it is time for the two protagonists to ride off into the sunset together, they don't. They don't. What we find instead is the earrings get returned to Eric Stoltz because Lea Thompson's character has come to grips with the fact that she had been hinging her self-worth on this previous relationship. She had been in dating relationships with men to elevate herself, and all that did was make her feel degraded inside. And now she's going to do the right thing, even if it means being alone. She's going to figure out who she's going to be as an adult now, post-high school, without a relationship. And you get the idea of her gratitude, and these two people have bonded and they've become friends, though opposite sex, but they have not become the romantic couple that you assumed was going to happen at the beginning. Which also leads us to Eric Stoltz. His character goes through this arc of realizing that Lea Thompson was right. His motives were not pure. He was stained by seeing things through this perception of the culture. And he's figured out, of course, that who he really loves is his best friend, Mary Stuart Masterson, who clearly has loved him all along, and they end up together. It's a very surprising turn of events. This is how you subvert expectations, and yet it's very satisfying. It's very satisfying. If you were an 80s kid, you remember Lea Thompson from that era, you start off the movie like Eric Stoltz's character. You think she's cute. You're hoping you're going to end up together. At the end, though, you've actually gotten a very interesting education on what it is about her you've actually seen. By seeing what it is in her, he has actually seen. And that's not how things work out in the end and isn't even right. she ends up emerging, Leah Thompson's character, as a truly realized individual that is more than the sum of her parts. And so does Eric Stoltz, realizing that he is not what his past has been or what his dad wants him to be. It isn't necessarily what he's planning. It's going to work out how it's going to work out, and you do the best you can a little at a time. And Mary Stuart Masterson, we get bits and pieces of her character's life and trauma, that she's finally going to end up with this guy that she loved. We don't know what their destiny is going to be, and we will not ever find out. There's only one film. And yet what we actually witnessed, instead of your typical bad guy, jock, popular kid gets his, poor, nerdy, geeky guy gets the girl, they live happily ever after, we get something far more in-depth and more poignant about that phase of life, that late adolescence leading to young adulthood. We get so much more from these characters than what you would expect in a film like this, that I ended up watching it a couple times because I thought it was that good. So there we have it, 1987. What did you think? Have you seen it? If not, check it out. It is currently included with Prime. That's where I saw it. Some Kind of Wonderful.